They say karma takes its time, but sometimes it shows up wearing pink spandex and flying an ATV straight into a koi pond. One moment, karma was revving her engine like a redneck Evel Knievel, waving at her yoga club like she was the queen of entitlement. The next, she was airborne, defying gravity, logic, and 3 separate property violations before landing face first in the one part of my yard she'd never dared trespass. What came next wasn't just a splash, it was the beginning of a legal circus, a viral internet saga, and the unraveling of an HOA empire built on nepotism and noise. I didn't set the trap, but I sure as hell documented every step she took toward it, and by the time she accused me of koi warfare, it was clear this wasn't just about a crash, it was about boundaries, justice, and what happens when someone finally says, enough. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from. And if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. The whole thing lasted maybe 6 seconds, but it played in my brain like a highlight reel from the most chaotic local news blooper of all time. Her body curled over the handlebars, her mouth frozen in a confident, "Yay, ha!" the sun catching the frame of her oversized sunglasses as they launched skyward, never to be seen again. The pond didn't hesitate. It swallowed her whole like karma wrapped in cattails. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, blinking slowly, not moving, not speaking, just watching the ripples fan out like something ancient had been disturbed. I honestly thought for a second I might still be dreaming. Then, as if summoned by disbelief itself, her head popped up out of the muck, covered in algae, gasping, eyes bulging with fury, and that's when she screamed, "You're going to pay for this!" And I thought, oh boy, here we go. Karen flailed in the shallow water, limbs slapping against lily pads and koi bubbles, her pink athletic suit now a wet rag clinging to pride and poor life choices. She looked like a swamp mermaid auditioning for a courtroom drama. Hair matted with pond scum, mascara running like war paint, and her designer belt floating beside her like a little flag of defeat. She whipped her face toward me, rage and disbelief dripping from every syllable, and screamed again, "This is your fault! I could have died!" And all I could do was blink, still standing there, still holding my coffee, steam rising like the only sane thing left in the entire scene. She started limping out of the water, dragging her ATV helmet by the strap, shouting at her friends on the other side of the trail, "Call the police!" One woman started fumbling with a phone, another just covered her mouth in horror. Karen turned her fury back toward me, pointing a trembling finger still dripping with pond slime. "You set me up. You planted that trench to trap me." I wanted to laugh. I truly did. But I knew better. I'd lived here long enough to recognize the moment when a ridiculous accident stops being funny and starts becoming a legal battle. That was the moment. The look in her eyes wasn't embarrassment, it was vengeance. And that's when I realized something horrible. I was going to be in court before the week was over. Let me back up a bit. Before Karen, this neighborhood was quiet. Not retirement home quiet, but the kind of peaceful where you could hear your own thoughts. I'd lived here nearly 15 years, and in all that time, I'd built my little corner of the world into something I loved. My backyard was a sanctuary. There was a koi pond I dug by hand with smooth stones around the edges and little solar lights that glowed like fireflies at night. A footpath curved through a cluster of old trees, the kind you don't cut down because they remember more than you do. I walked that path every morning with my old shepherd, Daisy, and sometimes again at dusk, just to water the lilies. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine, peaceful, predictable, a slice of sanity. Neighbors would wave from their porches, swap gardening tips, and leave zucchini on each other's doorsteps when harvest time came around. We looked out for one another, respected fences, and shared pie recipes at block parties. There was a rhythm to it, a neighborhood heartbeat that pulsed soft and steady. Then Karen moved in, and the beat skipped. If my backyard was a symphony, Karen was the cymbal crash that wouldn't end. She brought the noise, the drama, the attitude, and unfortunately, an ATV that sounded like a fighter jet with asthma. She didn't just disturb the peace, she pulled it up by the roots and sprayed it with neon glitter, and from the moment her tires touched that footpath, I knew my trail was on borrowed time. Karen showed up like a tornado in yoga pants. From the very first week, she let everyone know she was taking charge. Loudly. Her voice could cut through drywall. Her opinions came unsolicited and daily. And the worst part? She was always just this side of polite. Enough to make you doubt your own irritation. Her property backed up against mine, with about 30 yards of woods and that sacred little trail in between. It had been a walking path for years, clearly marked, clearly mine, but the first time Karen saw it, she said, "Oh, this trail's perfect for my morning ATV rides." I blinked, I chuckled, I said, "It's actually private property." She laughed. "Yeah, but it connects, right?" That was the beginning. By week 2, she was barreling down it at full throttle. By week 3, she'd nearly taken out a squirrel, a garden gnome, and my fence post. I tried talking to her, kindly at first. She rolled her eyes, said I was being dramatic. I installed signs, private trail, do not enter, no ATVs. She tore them down. One of them I found broken on my porch with a sticky note, "Get over it." It wasn't just her, it was her attitude. Like she believed owning a home meant ruling a kingdom. She waved at my security camera once like she was in a parade. She talked to other neighbors like we were her tenants. And the cherry on top? Her cousin, Mitch, had just been elected HOA vice president. So when I filed a formal complaint, guess how that went? Nowhere, not a peep, not even a call back. Apparently family ties ran thicker than noise ordinances. And Karen? She treated that silence like a green light. She'd found her playground, and she had no intention of reading the rules. Karen's accusations hit the air like mosquito spray, loud, sticky, and entirely misplaced. She staggered out of the water with all the grace of a drunk flamingo, algae clinging to her like a second skin. Her sunglasses were gone, her phone holster was bubbling somewhere near my koi, and her prized ATV was slowly tilting sideways like it had accepted its fate. But none of that stopped her from pointing at me like I had engineered the entire event. "You planned this! You dug that trench on purpose," she shrieked, voice cracking with the indignation of someone who couldn't comprehend that the universe might be done letting her get away with things. I opened my mouth to explain, to deny, to laugh. Honestly, I wasn't sure which impulse would win, but then I saw the way her friends were watching from the tree line, frozen, some holding phones, others unsure whether to call an ambulance or a lawyer. I didn't respond. Not right away. I just turned, walked back inside, and grabbed a towel, one for me, not her, because I could feel the laughter boiling in my chest and knew if I didn't cover my face, I'd be doubled over in full hysterics. The absurdity of the moment was a perfect storm, an entitled neighbor, an unauthorized trail ride, and a pond that had become an accidental courtroom. The thing is, I didn't want this to happen. I wasn't the type to bait chaos, but when someone ignores warnings long enough, they eventually write their own punchline. Karen had seen the signs. She'd ignored them. She'd even mocked them. One of those signs, private trail, no ATVs, had been torn in half and left on my porch like some weird HOA ransom note just a week prior. But now she was demanding justice, like she'd just been wrongfully evicted from her kingdom of bad choices. By the time the sheriff's cruiser rolled up 20 minutes later, Karen had limped onto my lawn and collapsed in a dramatic heap, moaning about back pain and pond trauma like she'd survived a natural disaster. Her friends were gathered behind the property line, whispering and filming, unsure whether to step in or stay far, far out of legal range. The deputy, a guy named Russell I'd known for years, gave me a long, tired look as he got out of his car. "Tell me you've got video," he said before even reaching the porch. I nodded, held up the trail cam's SD card, and handed it over like I was offering the key to a mystery novel's final chapter. Russell gave a low whistle, glanced at Karen, now whining on the grass like a soggy tabloid headline, and said, "I swear this neighborhood didn't used to be this weird." All I could say was, "It's the HOA, man, they fertilize the crazy." Russell took Karen's statement, which included claims of psychological distress, lost property, and something about biological contamination from ornamental fish. I stayed quiet, answering questions with facts and letting my camera do most of the talking. Karen, on the other hand, sobbed to the crowd that I'd orchestrated her downfall with malicious intent, that I had lured her into the trench with strategically deceptive landscaping. At one point, she even suggested the pond was too symmetrical to be natural. "He planned this," she cried, "like a trap." Russell didn't laugh, to his credit, but the twitch in his cheek suggested it took effort. He wrote down everything, carefully, just like I had, with permits, dated emails, and photo evidence for every interaction we'd ever had. Because if Karen was going to start a war, she needed to know something. I didn't fight dirty, I fought documented. As the tow truck yanked her slime-coated ATV out of the pond like a soggy mechanical whale, Karen stood there trembling with anger, snapping pictures of my yard with her backup phone. Her voice carried on the wind. "You'll hear from my lawyer." I nodded, took a sip of my coffee, and replied, "Looking forward to it." What she didn't know, what she could never seem to understand, was that she hadn't just driven into a pond. She had driven into the last straw, the end of the line, the consequence she'd been outrunning since the day she started treating the neighborhood like her personal reality show. And while she saw herself as the star, she was about to learn what every miscast villain eventually does. When you ignore the script, you don't get applause, you get evidence. You get soaked. Saturday had started like any other. The air was crisp, the sun was warm, and my coffee was strong. The kind of morning where even the birds seemed to sing in harmony. I was on my porch watching the steam rise from the mug in my hands when I heard the now all too familiar sound of Karen's ATV engine revving across the property line. But this time, it was different. There was a crowd. At least 6 women gathered at the edge of her yard, laughing, clapping, filming. Her yoga club, I'd come to learn. The same ones who thought parking across driveways and yelling at landscapers was a form of empowerment. Karen stood center stage in a hot pink athletic suit that looked like it had been stolen from a 1980s aerobics infomercial, her sunglasses glinting like a disco ball in daylight. She straddled the ATV like she was about to take on Mount Everest. "Watch this, ladies! Redneck rally time!" she shouted, pointing toward the trail like it was her personal racetrack. I felt my stomach drop. Not out of fear. No, this was the kind of drop you feel when you know the universe just handed someone a loaded metaphor and dared them to pull the trigger. She gunned the throttle and the engine howled. Dirt flew from the tires as she blasted toward the footpath I had marked, fenced, and protected. Every single sign she had ignored was now whipping in the wind like a warning flag. And then it happened. Her front tires dipped into the shallow irrigation trench I had dug the week before. Nothing dramatic, just a small groove meant for water runoff. But at the speed she was going, it became the perfect launch ramp. The ATV caught air. For a glorious, terrifying, slow-motion 3 seconds, Karen was flying, literally. Her pink suit flapped like a dollar store cape. Her face went from joy to panic in half a heartbeat, and the machine, the overpowered beast she bragged about at every HOA meeting, was now twisting through the air like it had second thoughts about being part of her legacy. I didn't breathe. The whole yard stood still. It was like watching a suburban myth unfold in real time. Karen screamed, not a fearful scream, but one of commitment, as if shouting could keep her airborne. She was a suburban Icarus, rising on fumes and ego. Then, with the force of every poor decision she'd ever made, she landed. Not on the grass, not on the trail, but smack into the middle of my koi pond. The splash was biblical. A wall of water rose up like it was trying to baptize her sins clean, and for a brief moment, she vanished beneath the surface. Fish scattered, frogs launched themselves to safety. Even the solar fountain short-circuited and sputtered like it was choking on the drama. The pink ATV hit the bottom hard, bubbles rising like it was giving up the ghost. And then, silence. The kind of silence that only happens after chaos. A beat so long I actually wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd decided to stay down there. But Karen always surfaces, and she did, like a swamp witch reborn, sputtering, screeching, and flailing her arms as if the laws of gravity had personally betrayed her. Her friends on the lawn stood frozen, hands over their mouths, one woman's phone still recording with the camera pointed at the ground. Karen's sunglasses were gone. Her jacket was clinging to her like a sad wetsuit, and the waterproof phone case she bragged about at brunch was floating past the lilies like a pink marshmallow. I stood still, coffee back in hand, watching from the porch like a front row seat at a demolition derby. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew from the look in her eyes, this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something far messier. The letter came a week later, thick, formal, and folded 3 times like it was hiding something sinister. The return address was a law office I recognized from town, the kind that ran radio ads during talk shows and promised aggressive representation for the wrongfully wronged. My name was spelled correctly, which was the first red flag. Inside was a lawsuit which Karen was suing me for property damage, emotional distress, and, my personal favorite, reckless land. According to her, I had intentionally engineered an environmental hazard designed to launch unsuspecting individuals into a body of water, which sounded less like a legal claim and more like a deleted scene from a James Bond movie. I laughed. Then I read the part about her custom ATV modifications being irreparably damaged by koi waste, and I stopped laughing. She had a lawyer, Darren, her ex-husband, a name whispered through the grapevine with equal parts pity and popcorn. Darren was a legend in the worst way, balding, bitter, and the kind of man who passed out business cards at funerals. Word around town was he'd once tried to represent both sides of a divorce and lost custody of his own dog in the settlement. But to Karen, he was the bulldog she needed to take me down. I wasn't worried, not really, but I wasn't about to face this circus unarmed. So I called Nena. Nena wasn't just any attorney, she was the neighborhood's secret weapon, smart, fearless, and the former HOA president, who once passed a noise ordinance so airtight you could hear butterflies whisper. She had a personal history with Karen that went way back to the leaf blower rebellion of 2017, when Karen, still just a loud cousin living with her aunt, tried to organize a community protest against quiet hours. That ended with Karen screaming at a city official and her photo landing in a local paper next to the headline, "Neighborhood Nonsense Hits New High." So when I called and told Nena the situation, she didn't hesitate. "You've got paperwork?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "Then we're going to ruin her day." We met in Nena's office 2 days later. She read through the lawsuit with the expression of someone watching a toddler try to operate a power saw. "This is a mess," she muttered, flipping pages. "She's suing you for koi psychological trauma?" She looked up. I nodded. She sighed. "And she's claiming the pond was built with malicious topographical intent." Another nod. "Jesus!" She took off her glasses, rubbed her temples, and said, "Well, good news is we're going to destroy them." Then she smiled, that slow, dangerous, legally sanctioned smile that made grown men tremble in depositions. Nena wasn't just a lawyer, she was an artist, and Karen had handed her a blank canvas dipped in stupid. While Nena built her legal case, Karen took her own argument to the court of public opinion, also known as Facebook. She posted daily selfies in a neck brace, an arm sling, and bafflingly, a pair of crutches, even though her only reported injury was a mildly twisted ankle. She renamed the incident the Pond Assault, started tagging her posts with Justice for Karen and Pond Trauma, and even uploaded a GoFundMe asking for help healing from the coordinated neighborhood attack. But the internet is cruel, and the internet remembers. One neighbor clipped footage from the trail cam and set it to banjo music. Another looped her ATV flight and added frog croaks every time she soared. By the end of the week, she was no longer Karen, she was Pond Karen, and her crash had been turned into a meme, viewed more times than the HOA's own website. It didn't take long for Karen's cousin Mitch, the newly anointed HOA vice president, to get involved. I woke up to a letter taped to my front door. I was being fined $5,000 0 cents for unauthorized topographic manipulation. Apparently, digging a trench that accidentally launched someone into a pond was now a crime. They also cited me for non-regulated vegetation and uncontrolled aquatic features. I almost choked on my coffee. My koi pond, admired by neighbors and once used by local firefighters as an emergency water source, was now public enemy 1. Mitch was clearly flexing what little authority he had left. trying to paint me as a rogue landscaper while Karen paraded around town like a soggy martyr. I brought the letter straight to Nena. She didn't even read the second paragraph before calling the county records office. A few hours later, we had gold. Official permits dated over a decade ago, confirming the pond's legality and its prior registration as emergency infrastructure under the county's old agricultural zoning. In short, my pond wasn't just allowed, it was protected. Nena smiled like a wolf and said, "You know what this means, right? We don't just fight back, we file back." She began drafting a response that would make a bureaucrat weep. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was getting louder. People had seen Karen's meme-fueled fall from grace and were no longer afraid to speak up. Then came the bombshell. Carla, a neighbor known for her bird-watching obsession, came knocking. She'd had a live wildlife camera aimed at the woods for years, set up to capture migrating hawks and the occasional raccoon. That same cam had caught everything. Karen revving her engine, shouting, "Watch this!" launching over the trench and flailing midair like a cartoon villain. Even better, it was in 4K. Every detail, every ignored sign, every squeal of her cheerleading squad, every moment of airborne delusion, caught from a perfect side angle. When I showed it to Nena, she nearly spit out her tea. "This isn't evidence," she said, eyes sparkling. "This is a trial-ending nuke." Word spread fast. The video went viral, memes multiplied, someone even edited Karen riding a koi like a cowboy, complete with lasso and glitter trail. The HOA tried to bury it, but the court of public opinion had already ruled. Neighbors started putting up signs that said, "Watch this," as a joke, and one family hosted a BBQ where they reenacted the splash using a pink inflatable pool and a tricycle. It wasn't just mockery, it was catharsis. For years, people had rolled their eyes at Karen. Now they were done rolling. They were pushing back. When the HOA tried to fine another neighbor for a shed that had existed since the Clinton administration, people showed up in protest. And Mitch, he started skipping meetings altogether. Karen's grip on the neighborhood was slipping, and Mitch's paper-thin authority was unraveling faster than a cheap pool float. But they weren't finished, not yet. Darren, emboldened by Karen's online crusade, started sending daily emails filled with legal threats and increasingly bizarre demands. He wanted a map of my irrigation system, a breakdown of my landscaping expenses, and, no joke, a full koi inventory. Nena replied only once, "No, your client is not entitled to count the fish." After that, we stopped responding entirely, because the courtroom was coming and we weren't wasting one more ounce of energy explaining to grown adults why flying an ATV into someone's koi pond didn't qualify as assault. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, quieter too, like a library waiting for chaos. Karen walked in first, dramatically leaning on a crutch she didn't need last week, her neck brace freshly tightened and sunglasses so large they looked borrowed from a disguise kit. Darren trailed behind her, holding a stack of papers and a face that screamed, this was a mistake. I sat beside Nena, who wore a navy blue blazer and an expression that said she already knew the ending. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with reading glasses and a razor-sharp tone, looked over the docket and raised an eyebrow the moment Darren began his opening statement. "Your Honor, this case concerns a malicious landscaping trap." Her pen stopped midair. Darren's case was, well, enthusiastic. He described the pond as a covert aquatic hazard, the trench as a launch ramp, and me as a hostile topographical engineer. At one point, he even suggested the koi might be an invasive species trained to create psychological distress. The judge stared at him, deadpan, and said, "Do you have any evidence that the defendant trained his fish?" He stammered. Karen chimed in from the witness bench. They glared at me. The court reporter paused. You could hear someone cough from the back, trying not to laugh. That was our first real win. Nena stood, cool as morning fog, and laid out our side like she was teaching a class in common sense. She submitted the trail cam footage, Carla's 4K wildlife video, the pond permits, and printouts of Karen's social media posts, including one selfie with the caption, "Airborne baby." Then she dropped the hammer, a text message Karen had sent to a friend just 2 days before the incident. It read, "If I crash, I'll sue. My cousin says they can't touch me." You could hear the oxygen leave the room. Darren looked like someone had just shown him the final scene, of a movie he thought he was directing. Karen took the stand last. What followed was less testimony and more performance art. She claimed the signs were in a foreign-looking font, that my koi had charged her, and that the trail camera was positioned to intimidate women. When Nana asked if she had seen the warning signs before the crash, Karen replied, "No, I was spiritually distracted." Nana handed the judge a photo of Karen flipping off one of the signs the day before the crash. It was over. The judge leaned forward and said, "I've seen enough." She dismissed the case with prejudice, referred Karen for potential perjury, and ordered a full review of the HOA's conduct. Mitch, seated quietly in the gallery, looked like he wanted to dissolve into his folding chair. As Karen hobbled out of the courtroom, sunglasses now in her hand and muttering curses under her breath, someone from the hallway whispered, "Pond, 1, Karen, 0. Even the bailiff cracked a smile. Outside, I shook Nena's hand and thanked Carla, who had framed a still image of the splash with the caption, "Watch this," and handed it to me like a trophy. We'd won. Not just the case, but something deeper, something every neighbor in that courtroom felt: relief, justice, and a good laugh when we all needed it most. I thought it was over. I really did. But Karen wasn't done. A few days later, I received a notice from the local police department. Karen had filed a report accusing me of digital harassment, claiming I had weaponized memes and incited online bullying. She submitted screenshots from TikTok and Twitter, including one clip that came from a user named @PondRecorder69, who was clearly a teenager in Nebraska. She even blamed me for the ceramic figurine someone anonymously sent me, a sculpture of a woman on an ATV mid-air with the label "Flight Risk." I called Nana. She laughed so hard she had to sit down. "She's trying to sue the internet," she said. "This isn't a lawsuit, it's a stand-up routine." But this time, Karen's antics caught the attention of the wrong people. The county attorney's office, already irritated by her courtroom dramatics, began an investigation into malicious litigation and abusive process. Meanwhile, I decided to renovate the pond, new solar lights, a small fountain, even a little plaque, "Respect the splash." It wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about closure, about reclaiming my peace. The neighbors noticed. They started bringing snacks to the pond's edge, kids reenacted the Karen launch with cardboard boxes, and someone even taped off a VIP splash zone with yellow caution tape. The koi swam lazily beneath it all, completely unbothered. Then came the documentary. A man named Paul Rivera showed up one afternoon with a camera crew. He'd heard about the case through online forums and wanted to include it in a docuseries about bizarre civil lawsuits. At first I declined. Then he said the magic words, "You control the narrative." We filmed interviews with neighbors, Nana, even Carla. The footage of Karen's airborne antics played in the final cut, set to dramatic piano music. The documentary went viral. Within a week, Flight Risk, the Karen who sued a pond, had 2 million views. It was absurd, it was hilarious, and it was real. That's when the email came. From Karen, just 2 lines. "I saw the documentary. You could have made me look worse. You didn't. Thank you." No apology, no lawsuit, just acknowledgement. And honestly, that was enough. A year later, the HOA was under new leadership. Mitch had been quietly removed. Karen had relocated, allegedly, to a town where no one knew her name or her splash radius. And me? I still sip coffee by the pond, where the koi swim and the ceramic figurine quietly guards the edge. Sometimes peace doesn't come from winning. It comes from standing your ground with dignity, humor, and an SD card full of receipts. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts